Have you ever had that moment when your entire body freezes, knowing you're about to witness something terrible? That's exactly how I felt that Tuesday afternoon. The scene unfolds in my mind like it was yesterday: 5 young men surrounding Mrs. Chen, their faces twisted with cruel intentions, until something happened that made the entire street fall deadly silent. If you want to know how an ordinary person like me ended up changing an entire neighborhood forever, keep watching. And if this story resonates with you, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to support more real-life stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances. My name is Michael, and I've lived on Maple Street for almost 15 years. It's a quiet suburb where most people mind their own business, sometimes to a fault. I knew my neighbors by face, occasionally by name, but rarely by story. Mrs. Chen moved in about 2 years ago, a widow in her 70s who spoke broken English and kept mostly to herself. I'd wave when I saw her tending to her immaculate garden, and she'd bow slightly in return. That was the extent of our relationship. That day started like any other. I was working from home, my laptop perched on the kitchen counter while I half-heartedly answered emails. The window above my sink provided a clear view of the street, and movement caught my eye. Mrs. Chen was returning from her daily walk, her small frame weighed down by 2 grocery bags. As she approached her driveway, I noticed a group of young men walking toward her from the opposite direction. Something about their body language immediately set off alarm bells. They were maybe 18 or 19, with the cocky swagger of boys who believed themselves to be men. 5 of them, all wearing similar dark hoodies despite the warm weather. They quickened their pace as they approached Mrs. Chen, and I saw her stiffen, her head lowering as she tried to hurry toward her front door. They surrounded her before she could reach it. My heart began to pound. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their postures were unmistakable, leaning into her space, one of them pointing at her grocery bags, another mimicking her walk with exaggerated shuffling steps. Mrs. Chen clutched her bags closer to her chest, her small body seeming to shrink even further. In that moment, something inside me snapped. I'd like to tell you I had some heroic thought process, but the truth is simpler and more visceral. I just couldn't watch it happen. Not on my street. Not to a woman who spent hours making sure every flower in her garden bloomed perfectly. I didn't plan what happened next. My body moved before my brain caught up. I threw open my front door and stepped onto my porch. I grabbed my phone and held it up high, clearly recording. And then I shouted, louder than I've ever shouted in my life. "Hey! I've got all of you on video. The police are on their way." The street went completely silent. All 5 heads whipped in my direction. Mrs. Chen's eyes widened in surprise. For a second, nobody moved. It was like someone had pressed pause on the entire scene. I started walking toward them, still holding my phone high, though I hadn't actually started recording yet. My legs felt like jelly, but somehow they carried me forward. The young men exchanged glances, clearly debating their options. I kept walking, my eyes locked on the tallest one who seemed to be their leader. "I've got your faces," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And my security cameras have everything that's happened in the last 5 minutes. So you can leave now, or you can explain yourselves to the officers who are on their way." This was a complete bluff. I didn't have security cameras, and I hadn't called the police yet. But something in my tone must have convinced them. After a tense moment, the leader shrugged and muttered something to the others. They began backing away, trying to look casual, like they'd never intended any harm. "Whatever, man," one of them called out. "We were just talking to her." I kept my phone raised until they disappeared around the corner. Only then did I let my arm drop, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. The adrenaline rush left me feeling dizzy and slightly nauseous. I turned to Mrs. Chen, who stood frozen, still clutching her grocery bags. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice now much gentler. She nodded slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, she whispered. Thank you. I offered to help her inside, and to my surprise, she accepted. Her hands were trembling as she unlocked her front door. Inside, her home was immaculate, small and sparsely furnished, but spotlessly clean with the faint scent of jasmine in the air. Photos of what I assumed were her children and grandchildren lined the walls. She gestured for me to sit at her kitchen table while she put away her groceries, moving with the precision of someone for whom routine provides comfort. Those boys, she said finally, her back to me as she arranged cans in her cupboard. Not first time. 3 weeks now. My stomach tightened. They've been bothering you for 3 weeks? Why didn't you tell anyone? She turned to face me, her expression a mixture of dignity and resignation that made my heart ache. Who I tell? I do not know neighbors well. Police. She shook her head. In my country, sometimes police make things worse. I felt ashamed then, not just for her fear, but for my own obliviousness. For 15 years I'd lived on this street, nodding politely to the people around me, never really seeing them or their struggles. Mrs. Chen, this isn't right. No one should feel unsafe in their own neighborhood. She sighed, finally sitting across from me. You are a kind man, Michael. But what can be done? Boys will come back when you're not watching. She was right, and we both knew it. My impulsive intervention had solved nothing long-term. I couldn't stand guard outside her house forever. As I walked back to my own home later, I felt frustrated and helpless. I'd acted in the moment, but what good was it really? That night, I couldn't sleep. Images of Mrs. Chen's face kept appearing in my mind, her fear, her resignation, her quiet dignity. Around 2 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went downstairs. I made a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table, staring out at the darkened street. And that's when an idea began to take shape. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Then I started knocking on doors. I began with my immediate neighbors, then worked my way down the street. Most people were surprised to see me, some couldn't even remember my name despite our years of proximity. I told them about Mrs. Chen and what I'd witnessed. Some were concerned, others non-committal, a few openly skeptical about getting involved. By mid-afternoon, I was discouraged but not defeated. I'd managed to get phone numbers from about half the street, and I created a group text. Neighborhood watch meeting, my house, 7 p.m. tonight, I wrote. Refreshments provided. I didn't expect much, but to my surprise, people showed up. Dave from across the street brought beer. Lisa from 2 doors down arrived with homemade cookies. Even grumpy Mr. Peterson, who I'd never seen speak to anyone, appeared on my doorstep at 7:05. By 7:15, my living room was crowded with neighbors who had lived near each other for years but barely interacted. I explained what had happened with Mrs. Chen, and as I spoke, I saw something change in their expressions: shame, anger, and then determination. Those punks have been trouble for months, said Dave. They slashed my garden hose last summer. They scared my daughter at the bus stop, added Jennifer, a single mom from the end of the street. One by one, stories emerged. These young men had been terrorizing our neighborhood in small ways for a long time, but none of us had connected the dots because we simply didn't talk to each other. As the night progressed, a plan formed. We would create a real neighborhood watch, with scheduled walks and a proper phone tree. Security cameras were discussed, with those who already had systems offering to adjust them to better cover the street. Lisa, who worked from home like me, offered to keep an eye on Mrs. Chen's house during the day. Most importantly, we decided to approach Mrs. Chen as a group, to show her she wasn't alone. The meeting ended with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The next day, 6 of us walked to Mrs. Chen's house together. Her surprise at seeing all of us on her doorstep quickly turned to emotion when we explained why we had come. She invited us in, and soon her small living room was filled with neighbors introducing themselves properly for the first time. "We want you to know you're not alone," I told her. "We're going to look out for each other from now on." She covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling down her cheeks. Then she disappeared into her kitchen, returning minutes later with a dusty bottle of plum wine and tiny cups. "In my country," she said as she poured, "neighbors are like family. I think maybe now, here too." We raised our cups in a toast that felt like the beginning of something important. Over the next few weeks, our street transformed. People greeted each other by name. Children played together in front yards while adults chatted. The neighborhood watch walks became social events. Mrs. Chen taught several of us how to properly prune roses, and her garden expanded as neighbors contributed plants. The young men returned once, about 2 weeks after our confrontation. They swaggered down the street as Mrs. Chen was working in her garden. But this time, something different happened. Doors opened all along the street. Dave emerged from his house. Lisa stepped onto her porch. Jennifer appeared with her teenage son. Within moments, a dozen neighbors stood watching, phones visible in hands. The young men slowed, looked around at all the witnesses, and kept walking. They haven't returned since. But this story isn't really about scaring off bullies. It's about what happened to our street afterwards. How we went from strangers who happened to live near each other to a community that cares for its members. It's about Mrs. Chen teaching neighborhood children to fold dumplings, and Mr. Peterson surprisingly revealing himself as a chess master who now hosts weekly games in the park. It's about the block parties and the babysitting co-op and the carpools that developed once we started talking to each other. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed inside that day, if I just continued watching through my window as I had so many times before. One person can't change everything, but sometimes one person can start something that changes everything. Last week, Mrs. Chen invited the entire street to a Lunar New Year celebration. As I watched her laughing with neighbors, showing children how to write Chinese characters, I realized something profound. In trying to protect her, we had all gained something invaluable, a true sense of home. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: look up. See the people around you. Be the person who steps forward when it matters. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice breaking the silence to change everything. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing for more real-life accounts of ordinary courage and the extraordinary connections that can grow from them. And remember, communities aren't built of houses, but of people who choose to care about each other.